What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 3 of the Plat Perspective. We're back again due to some huge technical difficulties. My computer exploded. I had to build a new one, lost all my files, images, everything like that. Had to pull it all back together. And then about 10 minutes before we were to get on here, Fineokay's webcam went down, so we've got this very flattering photo of him instead. So, yeah, it's a high definition live feed of Fineokay's room with the Book of Loki. So, bear with us on this episode. This one's going to be a little rough, rougher than normal, but we're going to get through it. Topic of today is the solo lane. The episode obviously called "This Is Solo," the epic lane where you're basically on your own for the whole game. And it's a pretty technically challenging lane, right? Like you gotta know a lot, right? You gotta know your matchups. You gotta know who you're playing against. Tully, your light is like blinding. You look like a ghost.
I can change it here.
But so with that, I wanted to get some folks with us that are very experienced in the solo lane. We've got Fineokay, who is a current, I believe, or I may not be allowed to say, professional Smite player in the solo lane. And we also have Mr. Anatoliy, a washed up solo lane Smite player.
Yeah, I like to consider myself in the dryer than the washer, but that's just me.
Oh
yeah.
my god, this is a horrible joke.
Have you seen how many games I played?
Hey, you're putting in work this season. It's great to hear. So, by the way, guys, if there's anything wrong with like the audio volume, if somebody's too loud, somebody's too quiet, I had this all set up and it was all looking good and everything went to hell. So just let me know if anything needs to get adjusted. Everybody says I'm like notoriously quiet, but let me know if you can't hear us. But you know, with that, I'll introduce these guys. Tully, you want to go first? Talk a little bit about yourself, your experience with Smite, and then Fineokay will go to you after that, and then we'll get right into questions.
Sure. All right. So my name's Anatoliy, caster for Hi-Res Studios, Smite and other games included. Done a little bit of Paladins. Been with the company for almost 2 years now. Before that, I was a competitive solo player for Smite. Former teams Eager, Team Dignitas, Root Gaming, Juice Gaming, all that stuff. Before Smite, I got into competitive scene through Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne, 1v1s and RTS genres. So that's why I think translating into competitive Smite, my biggest interest was in the solo lane because of just the mind games that you can kind of play with your opponent.
Sure, you're a big chess player too, right? Like you like thinking that like 10
I was actually playing before we got here.
Yeah. So Tully's a very good chess player, and you know I think you know when you think of the solo lane, it's kind of funny. It is like a little game of chess, right? It's all these like little minute details and thinking that like 10 or 15 steps ahead, right? Like if I poke him out, I got to go do this, and then this, and then this, and it's this kind of like snowball effect of you know what your next move's going to be, and you know, versus some of the other lanes which are very like reactionary, right? So I think it's kind of interesting that you can draw the parallel between those two. But all right, Fineokay, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Fineokay, and I've been a professional Smite player for almost a year now, coming up in I think May, maybe April or something. Because I got picked up by SOAR last year when Benji was mysteriously missing from their roster. For whatever reason, he basically just left. And then I got my shot to play, and I was playing jungle at the time because back in the Challenger Cup, I switched to jungle because I didn't think there were like many good junglers, especially after they all left for console scene. So I decided to switch to jungle. And then when I had the opportunity, because I like messaged VDM or something back then, opportunity to play or try out for solo, I did. And since I had played it before and that was kind of my main role, I just picked it up again super fast. So yeah, so I took a brief hiatus from solo, but for most of my career I've been playing it. I've been playing Smite for about 3 or 4 years. Originally, like especially when I was younger, I used to play like Call of Duty and was super into like game battles and MLG and stuff like that. So I've always been kind of like a competitive guy, and solo lane is just I just feel like it's my role because you can kind of just bully people and kind of do whatever you want, and this just kind of fits my personality. And sometimes it's pretty troll too because it's really hard to be punished in that role, so kind of more like leeway and opportunities to make big plays. So yeah, that's kind of why I like it.
Very cool, awesome. Thanks for that. And guys, just so you know, both Tully and Fineokay both have Twitch streams. They stream the solo lane exclusively, and they're both very analytical, right? Like a lot of these guys that you watch play, they just kind of like they'll talk to chat, or they'll kind of like make just general commentary. These guys are very good about breaking down exactly what it is they're doing while they're doing it, right? So instead of it being like conversational with the people that are watching, it's more like totally. I've watched him a couple of times where he'll actually narrate everything that he's doing, and it's extremely helpful. So check these guys out on Twitch. Fineokay, you have a YouTube as well where you post a lot of guides and coaching, and things like that as well. That'll be in the description of the YouTube video when I get it up there. But definitely go check that stuff out, guys. Check these two out. If you're looking to learn the solo lane, there's nobody else better in terms of content creators that you can learn from. So, with that, let's dive right into to the questions, right? So the first one is and I've asked this about every single role, and actually I've asked most of these questions about every single role, is what's the biggest change in the solo lane since season 4, right? And I think for a lot of lanes there's a lot of big changes, right? But the solo lane, I think in my mind it's probably changed the least. It's kind of sit there, beat the brakes off the guy you're fighting, ward yourself, and get huge, right? But what's your guys' opinion on that? Like, what do you think the biggest changes are? If I'm a solo laner from season 4 coming into season 5.
So, in my opinion, the biggest change is the fact that you don't lose 100% gold under your towers. So you could specifically put yourself in a losing matchup at levels 1 through 6, let's say, play maybe some Guan Yu, some tier that might not have the best early game clear. And then, because you're not going to lose 100% gold, you're not going to be super behind as you were in season 4. On top of that, a lot of these gods now that get behind can solo their own blue potentially by themselves. Meetings are a little bit easier than they were in season 4. The buff comes up every 2 minutes. Back harpies up every minute. So you have more time to farm in between waves as opposed to doing the fire giant elementals every minute and 40 seconds, which were a little bit more snowbally for solo laners specifically. If you were able to solo that every single respawn, that's how solo laners really got ahead, I felt, in season 4.
Yeah, I agree with that as well, especially the fire elemental change. It allowed a lot of snowball. If you just picked a pressure god and you consistently kept getting those elementals, you would just get a lead in the lane. And you really didn't have to do anything for it, just out clear the enemy solo. So if they were picking somebody like a guardian with a super low pressure, you kind of just instantly were getting leads. You didn't really have to play it you didn't have to play it really correctly at all or outplay them. It's just how it worked. So that's one difference for sure. Another difference is, I think, with the addition of Warrior's Blessing, I think it's a really, really good item. It makes you super, super tanky early on. And at the end of Season 4, and maybe throughout all of Season 4, I'm kind of forgetting, it was more of like a 2v2 lane. Like, even the duo lane at the end of Season 4 was more of a solo lane because the ADC was almost always exclusively solo farming, and the support was kind of roaming around the map and stuff. And then you had your jungler almost always camping solo lane because of those elementals and like constant invades of speeds and stuff like that. And the jungler or the solos were a lot easier to kill because they were going items like Bluestone and Death Toll, which didn't provide any protections. But
right.
Warrior's Blessing, on the other hand, is kind of like the perfect, I guess, blend of Mark of the Vanguard and Death Toll because it gives you sustain, it gives you health, it gives you 15 protections each once you fully stack it. The reduction on the damage is super important because minions do literally 0 damage to you throughout most of the game. So junglers can't really camp that lane anymore early on. Until they get their pen items on and stuff like that, they're not going to be able to kill. So it's more of a solo lane in Season 5. Season 1, 2, 3, it was more of a solo lane. Season 4 is more of a duo lane. But now we're back to that true solo lane like we want it to be.
Yeah, it almost seems like the itemization choices and a lot of and even the items. If I'm just thinking about like what junglers are building these days, right? It's a lot of stuff that doesn't really have a whole bunch of pen on it, right? Just maybe a little bit of flat pen, but the second you get a breastplate, right, like, they mitigate only half of that, even if they're almost full build, right? You think you got Heartseeker, Crusher, Jotuns, that's like what, 25 pen, 35 pen, right?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make a difference when you got somebody that's got like a Glad Shield and a breastplate online at that point, right? So it almost seems like they intentionally made it not worth the jungler's time to come over to the lane.
Yeah, pretty much, because there's also so much jungle farm that you can have, so they're almost always in the jungle doing something,
right,
or helping out their mids, because with those changes to Heartseeker and Crusher, mids are super easy to kill for junglers. They just one-shot them, so they kind of always have to be there so that they can maybe either help out their mid or counter engage and kill the enemy mid. So
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've been, I've been playing a lot of jungle lately. And I've almost found myself like, if I need kills or if I want to get my team ahead, like I'm going after the mid laner and I'm going after the ADC. Because inevitably, the ADC has such a long distance to run to get back to safety. If they're pushed up even a little bit, it's like free kills, right? And then, the mid is just it's so vulnerable now. Even with all the health of warlocks and things like that, like you're just getting exploded. If you step out even a little bit these days. So that's a good point, man. I like the changes. I think it's neat that there's more, jungle farm that's kind of neutral, or I wouldn't say neutral. Personal, it's on your side of the map, right? So between waves, right? Like Totally said, I'm not going to a contested camp, right? I'm going to my blue, my backs. Maybe I'll invade their backs if I'm really out pressuring them and I know the jungler's in, the other side of the map. But for the most part, it's all safe farm, so you just kind of sit there and you get huge.
I think on top of that is like junglers are still trying to figure out what they want to do. So some instances, junglers won't even be in the solo lane like Fineokay was talking about, where there's just so much to do, especially with junglers trying to do this strategy of like doing speed buff solo to red buff, ganking dueling with blink. They'll hit level 2 off of soloing red buff, and that allows the solo laners a lot more leeway to kind of do whatever they want, which is why I've been personally like experimenting a lot with solo laners, like more like magical solo laners, whether it's guardian or actual mages, and having relatively good success thus far.
Sure. Yeah, and that brings me to my next question. So we'll switch on over. So every time I talk to Weekend, I talk to Incon, I talk to Hurry, I talk to Aggro. There's 3 categories of gods, right? There's what's in the meta, what's good for new players, and then what should I avoid if I'm a new player? This show, at its core is, for the people that are just picking up Smite or just picking up Conquest. I've got 800 hours in Arena, and I said I want to play a different game mode, right? Like that's what the messaging of this is for, right? So, I think of a god like Cullen, right? He's very strong, or he seems very strong, but his kit's kind of hard to manage if you're not really good at paying attention to his rage and how that works and things like that, right? So it may not be the best god for people to play. So when you guys think of like the 3 categories of gods, who's in the meta right now? If I'm a new player, who should I play? And if I'm a new player, who should I avoid? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'll take this one first, I guess.
Sure.
For the meta, I think that Cullen is probably one of the top warriors. Cullen, I think Osiris is still good just because he wins a lot of the matchups as far as the warriors go. So I'd say those 2. And Bellona, I think is probably good in the meta also just because she also wins pretty much every matchup and is super safe and out clears a lot, especially early on. And I think some of the Guardians as well are in the meta, actually, like Sobek. I think Ardio is definitely viable in solo, possibly even like Kuzenbo and stuff like that.
Oh, the turtle's coming into the meta. I love it.
Yeah, so I'd say if you're going to play Guardian, maybe try those 3 that I think are in the meta right now.
Sure.
But then as far as like if you're a new player and you need to, try and play something that's simple and it will show you the role most, I guess bestly would be to play like Chalk maybe, or even Hercules, and maybe even Tyr. I think Tyr has pretty high skill cap, but he's super safe in lane. He's really good for new players just because he has that heal that's on like a 6-second or 7-second cooldown.
Sure.
So you can kind of never die if you play it, you just play it correctly.
What do you think about Wukong, right? Because I think about him, it's like his clear is pretty safe. He clears like what? He full clears a wave at level 3. Right?
Yeah.
He's got the CC immune ult. He's got a good escape. Is he in the meta enough that he can be used for a new player, or is he still kind of a?
I think so. He would probably be the 4th god I put in there, just because,
sure,
like you said, his clear is super simple and safe. He has an escape. He's kind of unkillable with his ult, and the fact that he has a bird that goes, I think, across the map.
Yeah.
And he's just a simple god. So, and he definitely fits the role of solo lane because he's tanky, hard to kill, kind of messes with their backline. Can farm pretty efficiently by clearing waves, and then going towards jungle camps with his escape and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd throw Wukong in there definitely for new players.
Sure. What about you, Tully? What's your opinion on the
So for who's in the meta specifically, there is no meta because SPL really hasn't started. So it's all about what's been working for the individual and ranked, right? And for me specifically, it's whatever I pick that doesn't die to jungle ganks right off the bat. Playing against Fineokay, he actually played jungle against me a couple times. Did abuse me when I didn't pick gods that were super safe in the solo lane. He picked a lot of Osiris's, a little bit of Erlong Shen as well, some left click warriors, and those, you can't really go wrong with, at least in the solo lane,
Sure.
fighting potentially wise. But I think I agree with all those gods that he mentioned. I would also add Hades to that mix specifically.
Really?
Very difficult to kill, has sustain inside, and he also heals his own minions, making it more annoying for the enemy soul laner to, look for the clear. Could look for some invades after the fact, maybe back harpies, maybe blue buff. For new players, it's really tricky solo lane for new players. I think anyone that has like a line skill shot that you can't miss the wave and can hit the enemy at the same time. Chalk, who's one of those guys that Fineokay mentioned. Sun Wukong is a good one because, just 1-2 the wave, right? Any 1-2 combos. I would also maybe include Vamana simply because you're easily able to clear the wave at like level 6, even if you really wanted to. Difficult to lock him down once he goes into his ultimate for some heals. Who would I avoid as a new solo laner? I would avoid like Guan Yu and Amaterasu because they
Yep.
can get easily abused in the early laning phase. But those two gods specifically, I think, are the best team fighting gods. And I think with, more experience under your belt, those gods should definitely be picked up more often than not, especially maybe if you have a dual Q partner in the jungle that can, help you, give you a little shove in the early game to make sure you don't get too far behind early.
Sure. So Amaterasu is definitely like better in the late game team fight, harder to lane with. Same with Guan Yu, and their kits are pretty complicated as well, right? I mean, like if you think about it, right, you got to be managing your auras and your ult and everything like that, and your clears isn't very good. So yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. So top 4 would be like Bologna. For new players, we got Bologna, Shock, Sun Wukong, and Hades. So if you're just trying out the solo lane, I can't tell you how many times when I first started playing Smite, it was like, people wanted to avoid the solo lane so much that they would, call support instead of like going out there on their own. So just knowing where to start is very, very helpful. Also, guys, I was going to have a video on gods like Bologna that have things called cleave autos. Cleave autos is when you auto attack and it can hit multiple minions in kind of a cone in front of you. Gods like Erlang, Bologna, and Nike all have a cleave auto in their kit, right? So it's very important to understand how you group up the minions while you're fighting in lane so you get the most out of those auto attacks by hitting the other player. I'll probably post a separate video on my channel just of what that is. It'll be, a minute and a half long, 30 seconds for each god of how to do it. But that'll be available later. Unfortunately, again, technical difficulties. We kind of ran into a wall there. So that's good. So avoid Amaterasu and Guan. Anybody else that you specifically wouldn't play in solo if you didn't know what you were doing?
I agree with Ama and wait, who's the second one?
Guan Yu.
Guan. Yeah, I definitely agree with them because they can get bullied easily. Another one I think I would throw in there is probably Erlang Shen, just because he has a lot of auto attack cancels. He has no CC immunity in his kit. A lot of his stuff can get interrupted, like especially his turtle and his ult can get interrupted pretty fast.
Right.
So he's hard to play safe, but he wants to play aggressive. So you kind of have to balance that in between. It's just hard for newer players, so I'd put him in there.
Okay, cool, great. All right.
Yeah.
On to the next question. I completely forgot what it was, so I'm gonna ask it when I see it. Solo starts. I've seen a lot of stuff in the last couple of weeks, right? I've seen everything from Warrior's Blessing, Tier 1 Stone of Gaia. I've seen Tier 1 Glad Shield. I've seen Warlock starts for some of the Guardians. What's the, there's obviously not a standard, right? It depends on who you're playing and what you're doing. But, like, give me a breakdown of some of the different starts and when I should pick them.
I think it's about safety more than anything else. If you want to play super safe in the solo lane, just go pick up teleport as a relic selection. That way, if you do get bullied out, you'll get back to lane anyway. You can rotate to team fights, especially with the map being so big now, 20%, 25%, something like that wider. it's definitely worth picking up just to be able to get to the dueling, get to the Gold Fury fights, which is kind of inconsistent right now in terms of when those Gold Fury fights get on. So picking it up now, you'll never really miss those team fights. On top of that, Warrior's Blessing you can never go wrong with. Even on like a mage, like in the solo lane, you want to be able to sustain a little bit. I've been experimenting with like Habwa in the solo lane. I just go full tank Habwa, Warrior's Blessing, and I just out trade usually in the laning phase as long as I don't get ganked by any particular individual. And yeah, so Warrior's Blessing is definitely a must. Now, in terms of your secondary item, you don't always have to go a secondary item after your star item. If you feel like you want to save that item and get more health potions on top of your health chalice, that's also not a bad idea, just to be able to stay relevant in the laning phase and then look for what will be the best item in the future. Because things can change after like the first 2 minutes. You might, let's say, start all of a sudden tier 1 breastplate of valor for that 20 physical protections, and then all of a sudden you're on a huge roll in killing spree or whatever, and then like, okay, well, now I don't really need this physical protection, I'm gonna be investing into boots. So sometimes getting those 2 to 3 extra health potions is worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. I think Warrior's Blessing, like I talked about before, is super good right now, so it's kind of the staple in solo lane. Even though it has no physical power on it, it doesn't really have like anything to help your damage. The fact that you're tankier just will allow you to like if you go Warrior's Blessing and you play it correctly, you should be able to outtrade somebody pretty much no matter what if they don't have Warrior's Blessing, just because you're much tankier than them. Every 10 seconds you're getting 40 health plus 40 mana back if you're hitting them. So I think that's kind of the staple right now in solo, like Tolly said. You could even be going it on mages if you're playing mages in solo, just because it allows you to at least stay even with them. As far as like trading and poke and stuff like that. So Warrior's Blessing, kind of OP. But tier 1 breastplate with Warrior's Blessing is pretty good because it allows you to tank minions like super easily. I'm pretty sure an archer hitting you when you have Warrior's Blessing and tier 1 breastplate only does like 6 or 7 damage, which is like, that's kind of absurd because you're sustaining 40 health every 10 seconds. So that's a good start. Another option is to just not go an item, just go Warrior's Blessing. Well, the only item you'll have is Warrior's Blessing. Don't go like tier 1 boots or even tier 1 breastplate. Just go health chalice and extra pots, just in case you don't know what you want. You may not be wanting to rush boots. You may want to rush like a Stone of Gaia or whatever it is. So you kind of just don't invest into anything and just get extra pots so that you can stay out of base for a long time. So that would be kind of the build start. You can mess around with like Mage's Blessing on some gods. I would definitely suggest that for people who are more experienced in solo. But like I said, I just prefer Warrior's Blessing right now. It just allows you to outtrade super hard. So that would be my build start. And most of the time, as far as where to start on the map is, we're just starting in lane or trying to outpush the enemy solo because the blue buff spawns at 35 seconds. And usually the jungler's path right now is going from speed to blue or speed back harpies to blue, depending on how good their clear is and what they want to do.
Right.
So even if you out pressure at that level 1, first of all, it takes a lot longer to clear now because the minions are a little bit tankier and you don't have that extra power from like your Bluestone or your Death Toll.
Right.
So you're not going to be able to really invade because if you walk to their blue buff, their jungler is already there, and he can out clear you pretty easily because of Assassin's Blessing. So you never really can have that opportunity to invade unless there's just like this crazy out pressure potential with your jungler and your solo. So usually you just go to your own blue and share that with your jungler, and then that's how you start the game.
All right, cool. And so T1 Gaia, T1 Glad Shield, not optimal. Don't do that. Is that what I'm hearing? Breastplate's a better pickup?
Yeah.
I mean, it just works out because breastplate allows you to still get health chalice, whereas tier 1 Gaia or Glad Shield is not going to give you the health chalice.
Okay.
So that's just the one downfall. But you can still do it. Like, don't get me wrong. You don't have to go health chalice. If you feel like you're playing a god that already has sustain in his kit, that might not need the extra health chalice, especially if you go Warrior's Blessing anyway, as long as you're constantly on the ball with micromanaging that 10-second internal cooldown to get the 40 health, to get the 40 mana.
Right.
That is another, slightly more advanced technique, but it's definitely doable and plausible.
Cool. So if you're starting in the solo lane and you're new to the game, Warrior's Blessing, breastplate tier 1, health chalice, teleport.
Yeah, pretty simple.
And as soon as your first wave is down, go to your blue buff, split the XP with your jungler, and then go back to lane.
Yeah.
So I didn't have this as like a prepared question, so I kind of screwed up here because I did want to talk about it. Like let's talk about the laning phase itself, right? You know, we those of us who've been playing for a while tend to use a lot of terms that I think somebody new to the game can probably guess at what it means, but not necessarily understand what it means. Like poke, like trade, like out pressure, out clear, right? Like talk to me about the laning phase itself. And let's say I am a Bologna, right? So I'm watching this video. I say, okay, I'm picking a Bologna. I started my Warrior's Blessing, my Tier 1 Breastplate. I got my Health Chalice. I got my Teleport. I know how to do cleave autos because I watched Rathan's other video, right? What am I looking to do in lane? I'm a Bologna. I'm up against pick a god, right? You know, what's the difference between poke? What's the difference between trade? What do I need to do to maximize the passives of my starter items, right? Like, give me a breakdown of like what my objective is besides just trying to stay alive and farm.
So poking is more of like a long range thing where you're like hitting the enemy without getting hit back.
Mhm.
Trading is obviously where you're just boxing the enemy. You're both hitting each other, and normally you only want to trade if you have more sustain than the other opponent, and you're going to be able to come out on top in the long term. So that way, let's say you deal 200 damage, but he only deals 150. You know, that's going to be for the next 30 seconds, the next wave. That's where the other trade is going to slowly add on to the point where you're going to eventually either find the kill or force them to back to base to lose more gold or experience potentially. Very minute thing, but you know, it works out in the long run. And in terms of like, let's say, as a Bologna, what you want to do is you want to be able to min max your abilities and your in hands to not only hit the wave but also hit the enemy god. Very simple to do with Bologna's bludgeon. Even if it gets canceled, you still wield the hammer. So as long as you're use that ability, you also want to make sure you're positioning yourself next to the enemy god if they are next to the melee minions. That's why competitively against a Bologna, usually you're not going to stand next to her melee minions because she's going to hit you and the melee minions. So you'll stand next to her archers, clear those first, allow Bologna to clear safely, avoid her trying to trade with you because she's going to heal up with her Scourge anyway. And then long term, you know, try to look for other opportunities.
Right. So with Bologna in particular, make sure that you're able to, like, if you have an opportunity to use your bludgeon, which is your 2, the hammer, right? Auto attacks and hit the enemy soul inner at the exact same time. You always want to do it. That goes back to the cleave autos. That goes back to the fact that the autos are AoE. And you know, when we're talking about sustaining, she heals off of her 3. I think it's like every 4th auto attack or something like that, right? So
Yeah, it's
Third.
every 3.
is
Yeah.
3? Yeah. So every 3rd auto attack, you get a nice little heal. So she can go in and beat the brakes off of somebody a lot better than many other gods. All right, perfect. Fino, any thoughts on the subject there?
Yeah, totally covered it pretty well. I think another thing to add on to that is about clear potential. So
Yep.
usually, like if you out clear a god, you're gonna have more potential to poke them because they have a minion wave in their face, whereas you don't have you know like for example you're playing Bologna into let's say you're playing Wukong. He may be able to interrupt your bludgeon, but you're gonna out clear him early on, say level 2, just because you can group up the wave. You're clearing with your auto attacks, whereas he has to wait for a cooldown on each of his abilities to really clear. So you're just gonna outclear him. So that just allows you to have the opportunity to poke, unless he's like sitting under his tower, and you obviously can't hit him unless you go into his tower. Uh, you know, that just opens up an opportunity to poke. So that would be like another example of poking, not just like in the wave, but after the wave is dead.
Right.
Um, and then also trading, like Tolly said, it's just when you're like you both trying to hit each other because usually when it's a poke, it's like a poking thing. One person is just trying to avoid it, and one person is trying to like implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And then with trading, it's you're both trying to trying to hit each other and kind of mess with each other and be like I don't know big
Yeah.
dicks. So another thing about that is too, especially with like teleport and Warrior's Blessing, is if the enemy doesn't have teleport, what you can do is you can intentionally poke or trade with them so you get really low and then teleport back in because you just like wasted all of your life bar. so that you could teleport back in and be back like with full health, whereas they can't do that. So that's another thing you can do with trading and having teleport.
So you trade out with them, they get low, but you have the opportunity to just back and heal yourself. And I think that the fountain heals you fast enough where even if you're at like 25% HP, as soon as you back and you hit your teleport button and click on the tower, you'll be full HP by the time you actually teleport. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
All right, cool.
No matter what, I think even if you're like 1 HP, you'll be full health.
Yeah, because that I always thought that was interesting. Is kind of managing the teleport, and one of the reasons I was doing Gaia in lane myself was because I didn't really feel like I needed those extra pots because I had teleport, right? If I get low,
yeah,
and I can't sustain myself back up with the Warrior's Blessing, the HP 5 from the Gaia, I can just teleport back and grab some pots and head back to the fight. So that's good information. I think it's interesting. We're going to talk about it later about things that new players, the biggest mistakes that they make. And I think not poking and trading is like a big one, right? They clear their wave and they go, oh, I'm done here, right? This is my job. And, maybe I'll throw one ability on the other guy while he's trying to clear. But for the most part, they play really, really safe in lane. And I think, understanding your matchup is very important. But understanding that, there's more to be done after you clear your wave is also very, very important, right? Like, I know even before the waves even meet, if you can use an ability or two on the other guy and they can't get you back, like you should 100% be doing that.
Yeah, something else I forgot to mention also was other things you could do outside of poking and trading is min-maxing your time. So you were talking about like what do you do afterwards, right? Well, one of those things you could be doing is proxying between tier 1 and tier 2. A lot of soul laners will realize like, okay, well, there's no point in realistically trying to trade with this guy anymore. He's hit his power spike where he has enough sustain to basically negate all my poke or trades. So it's better for me to just take this advantage to position myself between the tier 1 tower, tier 2 tower, get that next wave, and that allows you about a 10 to 15 second window to either invade a buff or to maybe potentially gank the middle lane and then still come back in time to get your next wave in the solo.
Yeah, so I agree with that.
So proxying, I'd say, is like a 200 level technique, right? And I think most people that are just starting the solo lane, unless you got some big old brass balls and you're beating the hell out of whoever you're fighting, use sparingly, but know you're incredibly vulnerable while you do it, right? Like if the mid catches on, if the jungler is in your side of the map, if the support's already rotated, there's a good chance you're going to die unless you have some serious escape potential like Wukong, who can bird form and then ult over walls and things like that, right? So, for those of you that don't know what proxying is, you basically stand between their tier 1 tower, right? It's the one that they teleport out to, and their tier 2 tower. It's the one that ultimately, is behind the first one. And you can kill a minion wave there. You take a lot of poke from the minion wave, but as these guys said, you don't really take much damage from them anymore. And you can clear it before it ever gets to the middle of the wave, or the middle of the lane, which means that now you have all this opportunity before the next one to go and make an invade or a gank, right? So it's a very useful technique. It's very helpful when it comes to rotating. Maybe I'll include that in the video that I make later on in the week. All right, what's next? Warding 101. I wish I had a map for this, and Fineokay actually sent me an image for this, and everything crashed off my computer, so I don't have it. Is solo lane a position where I'm buying Oracle Chalice and dropping tons of wards all game, or do the junglers just not come over enough for it to really matter that much?
I think
situational.
I think it's situational. If you have enough money for it to buy it on your first back with full boots, then I think it's definitely good because you're getting it earlier. You get those first 2 wards out and you have it for the rest of the game. And usually you're not centering too much, even for like objectives where you would think there'd be a sentry. You can just ward above it, and you'll see when they go to it, and it's not really a big deal. You don't really have the counter ward. So it's definitely situational. If you're ahead, I would just do it because a couple of things like we talked about before, proxying. If you're able to ward their back camps, get the timer on that, and maybe even ward like around like above the portal or whatever it's called now, pyromancer, or maybe even ward like above their blue. Just have those wards up there just so you have the timers on those things. So you can see the jungler or the mid crossing those paths. If you ever want to proxy, you have that high ward just to know exactly when they're going to be there, so your team sees that as well. So if they see that they're going to try and come gank you when you're behind their tier 1, your mid and maybe your jungler can rotate over, and you might be able to make a play there. So I think you don't really ward for the defensive side. You're not really warding so that you don't yourself get killed anymore. It's more of helping out your teammates, like giving them information and also
Right.
allowing you to play more aggressive without getting that punishment from their jungler or from whoever is rotating over.
So definitely warding. So the Harpy camp, the white Harpy camp, between the speed buff and the blue buff. Obviously, I don't have an image for this, so I gotta kind of verbally explain it. But so
I think
warding
I
that
have it on
camp
my
is a good
computer
one.
still.
Yes, I can't pull it up yet. I can include it later. I'll include a link to it
Okay.
or something like that. But basically, warding that Harpy camp is hugely impactful. You know, if I'm only going to ward 2 places the entire laning phase, the Harpies and then where else?
Well, for the laning phase, I would pull it back a little bit, and I would throw one. Can't exactly explain it. It's above the fire giant pit, and close to their blue. It covers both paths that the jungler would walk through to
Okay.
even come to your lane. So it's like, um, just basically in between blue and fire giant pit. You should kind of get the idea of it. And then it would actually be the same exact place, but on the other end. So that would be for their side of the map, and you would just do the same thing on your side of the map in between blue and fire giant pit, and it would cover the only 2 paths the jungler could get into solo lane with. And it will give you about like a 3-second window for you to either decide whether you're going to, let's say, play up for this kill because you already have that enemy solo really low and you want to trade out a kill, or
Yep.
just back up and play safe. So it's definitely enough time with those 2 wards.
All right, cool. Awesome. Tolly, what do you think?
Yeah, basically, where I like to ward is basically there's a little wall between the blue buff and those back harpy camps. There, I place it right above there just to spot out when the jungler's coming from either speed buff, either back harpies, or between tier 2 tower. It covers those 3 angles. And the other ward, I like to help out my mid laner a little bit, and I'll place it above the like mid harpy area just to see if the jungler is going to be coming from that way as well.
Right.
An advanced technique that junglers can do to abuse that is jumping over one of those walls to find a gank. Very rare situation, but it has been done before. But as long as you covered those 2 avenues, you should be fine more often than not. And I think a lot of gods are very difficult to gank in the solo lane. So if you do get off that Chalice Oracle and all of a sudden you see a jungler coming, you can also kind of bait them into wasting more time in your lane so that they don't gank your dual lane, for example. And if you think like you'll survive the gank, then you might want to take that fight knowing that you can survive, where you're not going to use your escapes to clear the way, but you're going to use your escape as soon as they show up. Maybe they'll have to waste a blink trying to find the kill.
Right. So you basically that's a great technique. I like that. That's the mind game that you talk about going into the solo lane, right? It's like, hey, you know, I see this guy in a ward. I'm not gonna just immediately turn and run away. I'm gonna hang here. I'm gonna hold all my abilities. You know, I'm gonna hold my CC immunity. You call it a Hun Bats or whatever you want, right? And you know, he's gonna come over and try and kill me, but because I know he's coming, I'm at like 99% chance I'm gonna make it out of here unless something crazy happens, right? But just to waste his time so he can't go farm on the rest of the map, and it gives your team an advantage, right? He has to commit to that lane instead of like I know it happens like when I'm jungling, where if I step on a ward and somebody immediately freaks out and runs away and heads back to their tower, right, I just turn around and I go back to farming, right? So I don't waste another 15, 20, 30 seconds in the lane. So that's a great technique. That's like awesome insight. I love that.
Yeah, it also opens up the Gold Fury a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Because they're on your side of the map and they're spending so much time there that the jungler can't be at the Gold Fury, and that's pretty important for them to be there. So if your team recognizes it with those wards that we talked about, because they're not always for you, they're for your team as well.
Right.
If they recognize that, then bam, they can go ahead and start the Gold Fury and, you know, bait that, maybe even get kills off it, or maybe even just secure the objective. So.
Right.
And that's kind of also playing back into the whole proxy situation. You're baiting the enemy. You were saying how like normally you don't want to do it if the mid catches on, but sometimes you still want to proxy if the mid and guardian catches on, because like Fineokay said, it opens up the dual lane side.
Yeah, and another thing about that is if you have your wave pushed, you got all the XP that you need from that. If you die from it, yeah, maybe they get something off of that, but your wave is pushed. So it's not like they're going to get your tower.
Right.
Only thing they could do is pull like a Pyromancer or something, because it's they have a power play with somebody dead. But if your team's baiting Gold Fury while all of this is happening, it just opens up so many plays. And I'd say that making sure your waves are pushed is one of the most important things. Even if you're dying for it, a lot of times it can net you like a positive, because their solo laner maybe came to you while you're proxying instead of pushing the wave, and your wave's already pushed, and now he has to wait 15 seconds to even push the next wave. So it's not like they can't really make too many plays off of it, even if they get the kill.
So it allows you. I mean, I think it allows you to be a little. I don't want to say out of position, right? Because if you're in the right position, it's the right thing to do. You're not out of position, but it kind of allows you to position yourself more aggressively on the map in season 5 than it did in season 4, where, if you got caught proxying, it was not good.
Yeah.
Even if you had like teleport, right? So, all right, good stuff. So covered warding. If you're gonna do nothing else, ward between blue buff and fire giant pit, and ward the enemy harpies between speed and blue. Just to give your team some more information on where the jungler's at. You can also ward defensively on your own side if you feel like the enemy jungler is kind of in your jungle, getting your camps and out pressuring your mid lane and your jungler. So good information there. Move on to the next question here. Top 3 mistakes new solo laners make. I know it's been a while since you guys played against the plebs, right? But I think with matchmaking, right? Like even with the season restarts, right? You guys have seen it, right? There's the guy who's the bottom pick. The last thing that nobody wanted was the solo lane, right? And they get matched up against Anatoliy and Fineokay, right? I'm gold 1 and I got to play against Anatoliy, right?
Yeah.
What have you guys seen? I think Fine, you made a video on this as well on some bad habits to get out of. I think it was season 4. What do you guys see top 3 mistakes that new solo lane players make?
I'd say that they don't understand cooldowns as much as the more experienced players, understanding relics usages, understanding ultimate, because some ultimates are longer than others, right? You look at some Kong, for example, look at Chronos, like their ultimates are slightly longer than others. That's an important thing to play off of. Like if you trade a Balone ultimate for a Sun Wukong ultimate, more often than not, you're gonna find that kill secondary, the second ultimate cooldown, and playing off of that is a big deal. And I think when you're on the receiving end of an experienced player that does understand cooldowns, that's where you see the difference of the skill gap specifically. That's one of the biggest things. A secondary thing that I see is overconfidence in the solo lane is another big deal, where people are like trying to prove themselves a little bit too much for no reason, where there's nothing really to do, but they play too much on the tower line just to get maybe like an extra basic attack in, and then all of a sudden the jungler is just going to be ganking you, like a blink jungler, really punishing you. Those are the 2 things I would say.
Yeah, I agree with those. Definitely the cooldown thing. I think one thing is one of the most important things, I think, is when you're getting out traded and you end up getting super low, you don't want to get killed, and that will just put you way further behind than you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just have to take the loss and come back in with maybe another ward, full health. Maybe you were able to get a tier 1 of an item or something like that. It's not what you wanted to buy, but it's if you had made the opposite mistake of just dying and not getting those items, or like staying healthy in the laning phase, it's going to put you a lot further behind. So I would say that just taking losses when you have to is one mistake that people should make, I guess. Well, they shouldn't make, but and then I guess along the same lines of what Tolly was just talking about is playing super aggressive when they have a lot of kill potential with their jungler, or you just don't have anything warded. You literally don't know where anyone is, and you're just playing towards their tower line because either you're super confident, you're trying to, I don't know, you're trying to poke them, maybe you kill them on the next wave. It's not always about that. It's most important thing always is just make sure you're farming well, you're farming consistently, and out farming the enemy solo if you have to. If you have the opportunity. So just making sure you don't play too aggressive when you don't have anything warded and they have kill potential on you, because sometimes maybe you're playing like Sobek, and for some reason you're winning the lane and their jungler is like, I don't know, Chunga. Like they're not going to have that much kill potential on you, right? So in that situation, it doesn't matter too much, but just make sure you recognize the matchup and stuff like that. And always, make sure you're warding. Especially if you want to play aggressive. And then I think the third mistake, and this doesn't happen all the time, but with newer players and people that kind of, maybe they watch like YouTube videos of guides, or they'll watch like the SPL and they'll see people are building certain items. They'll kind of, I've talked about this in one of my videos, but they kind of just like cruise control their build. I've seen people even go Glad Shield against like a magical that can do damage to you. The point of solo lane is to counter your opponent to get advantages in lane and eventually be really big in fights and tanky and all that kind of stuff. But if you're in lane against a magical who can do damage to you, and you're building stuff like Glad Shield that gives you no magical protections or any sustain, like a Stone of Gaia or something like that, you're going to get out traded, and it's going to be easy. And that's kind of like the baseline in solo. Each of you should be counter building each other, and then whoever outplays with abilities, whoever has the better matchup, should be getting the better end of the trade. If you're well, not intentionally, but accidentally putting yourself at a disadvantage because you're just not building the correct items, then it's really bad, because you're just going to lose that matchup right then and there. Nothing to do with how you're playing. It's just what you bought at the time you were in base.
Right.
So just making sure you don't cruise control your build. Think about what you're against. If you're against a magical, maybe you should go magical defense. Maybe you should go Stone of Gaia because they have a knockup, and they're playing a Guardian. That's not going to do that much damage to you. So just think about your matchup and make sure that you're counter building correctly.
Yeah, like, well, for example, I always use this example, like, right, like, you know, and you can argue with me on this one, right, but like a Xing Chan, right, like doesn't have a ton of kill potential in lane, but like if they're a Xing Chan Thanatos, right, like do I build for the gank or do I build for the lane, right, like what do you, you know, we can go into that in the build section, but one other question I wanted to ask before we kind of finish up the mistakes new players make. Yeah, how do you play from behind, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing that I see in solo lane. Or the biggest mistake I see players make in solo lane is that nobody knows how to stop getting farmed. And you know, I do all kinds of like psychological tricks where like, okay, if somebody's freezing the wave on you, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's where you're low health or you're behind a couple of levels, and they know as soon as you step out from the tower, they're just gonna beat the hell out of you. So they stand on the tower line, they get all the XP for your minions dying, but you could get none of the XP for their minions dying, right? So if I'm down 3 levels, that's advantageous for them to do that, because if I step out, they're going to poke me out. I got to back to base. He may take my tower. If they are, you know, if their jungler's around, they can kill me. You know, there's really like, it's tough to play from behind in the solo lane because you don't get a lot of help, right? So like one of the things I do sometimes is I'll hide, right? Like I'll hide in the jungle, and they think I'm off farming a camp or, you know, making a rotation or going back to base, right? And they'll clear the wave because I'm not around. It makes no sense to freeze if I'm not there, right? And then as soon as they clear the wave, you know, I step out and I clear it, right? So what tips or tricks or, you know, things like that? You know, obviously it's not going to work at a high level, but would you say to players that are trying to play from behind, I got ganked early, I'm 2 levels down, what do I do now?
So the first thing I would say is don't get frustrated. That's the biggest thing that will probably hinder new up and coming players that, you know, can hit abilities but might not be the best team fighters, is their ability to handle deficits, and that also plagues certain teams. And the best thing to do in that situation is communicate with whoever's next to you about things that are worth communicating about. So like, let's say the enemy is playing aggressive on your tower line, you'd be like, hey, listen, his ultimate's down for like another 30 to 60 seconds. This is a good timing to potentially find a kill. And if the jungler is preoccupied because they're winning the duel lane instead, that's okay. Don't expect your jungler to necessarily go out of his way, because shutting down an enemy hunter might be better for your team in the long run. So being a little bit selfless, accepting some sacrifices every now and then, and play for the long term. Just look for the farm every now and then. If you're getting zoned out, because the enemy is playing behind your archers trying to trade with you, you have to know the leash radius of getting experience and gold. Stay within that leash radius, make sure you're not getting zoned out. And if they're still trying to trade with you, then, you know, make sure you just have the sustain. If you have to buy a health chalice as a result just to stay relevant, you know, then so be it.
Yeah, I agree with Toy on that stuff, but usually there's no way it would be that bad of a situation where you can't at least walk up and be in XP range, or at least be able to tag the front minions so that when those die, you'll still be getting the golden XP. Unless it's like an awful matchup like Anubis into Osiris or something like that, right, Totally?
And we're not going to talk about that.
Unless it's a matchup like that, then it's kind of like there's not much you can do, right? If you walk up to be in XP range, you're just going to get hit for all of your health nonstop, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just the god you picked, right? So like usually if you're playing a warrior into warrior, you're gonna always have that opportunity to make sure you get the XP and gold usually, and you can always you know, run away if you need to do that if they go on you super hard. But in that same vein, if they're playing super aggressive like that, just let your jungler know, like Tolly said, and maybe look for a gank. You can maybe capitalize off of their aggression. But what if you do end up getting behind? One of the best things you can do is just make sure that you're playing near your tower line. So if they do want to push up, they're going to be towards your tower line, and it's going to be pretty unsafe for them. Making sure that you keep the timer on your blue. Every buff is a 2-minute timer now.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you see the solo, he out clears you, you're poked, and he goes towards your blue buff, and you notice their jungler is there too. Look at the time on the top of the screen. Say it's 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell your jungler, type to your jungler, say, hey, 7 minutes and 30 seconds is the next blue. Let's try and defend it. And maybe if your mid comes over too, they know that they have a lead and they're trying to push that. Well, maybe all you have to do is just collapse on them, and then bam, you get 2 kills. You get your own blue buff. You're allowed to free farm for that time. That's one way to get back into the game. It's just playing around those objectives. Even though it's a buff, it's a tiny objective. So that's one way. Another way you can kind of get back into the game, and this is more of like for an experienced player, and this is going to sound dumb, but you just ignore the lane and you just go in proxy, because they'll try and come kill you. But like I said before, if you're getting the wave, if you're making sure people are rotating over to you to get the kill, as long as your wave is pushed, it's not that big of a deal, right? And it opens up stuff on the other side of the map. So that's something you could look to do. I mean, it's not like you should always do that, because sometimes the solo will just walk to you and kill you by himself.
Right.
It just depends on like your matchup, and if you're playing a god like Wukong, you may be able to get out. And the last thing I think is, even from behind in solo lane, say I'm like 2 or 3 levels behind the enemy solo, and I'm like pretty frustrated. I'm like pissed because like, oh, I'm better than this guy. Why is this happening to me? You're still getting solo farm throughout the entire game. In dual lane, they're splitting most of their farm. In mid and jungle, they're splitting most of their farm still.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be ahead. You should still be ahead in maybe like a level on most people in the game. And you're also building tank items, so you're harder to punish. So this means that even if you're behind, you're still going to be able to have an impact in the team fights. So just make sure you don't get too frustrated, and realize that, hey, I can still do my job in the team fights. I just need to make sure that I'm not incredibly behind by that point in the game.
Sure, and I think one of the other things is, and something that's understated, is that, you know, if you have a solo laner who's 2 levels ahead, let's say the guy's huge, right? Like, he's level 14, he's the biggest player on the map, right? Everybody on your team is like level 11 or below, right? Like, this guy is massive, right? Yeah. He's got a 3-level lead on you. Just by holding him in lane, you're doing your team a solid, right? Like, he's not roaming around the map. He's not taking your buffs. Like, so if they sit there and they're forced to poke at you, or they're forced to freeze wave at you, right? Just by staying alive and staying in lane, you're doing good things for your team, because he's not roaming the map looking to beat the brakes off of your mid laner, right? Like, I think a lot of people feel like they have to fight no matter what level they are, when really, even if you lose every single creep because he's freezing you, that's 30 seconds that he's sitting there doing nothing, that he could be roaming the map and going crazy.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Would you guys agree with that? I mean,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. We can move on there, guys. Hold your questions. There's a question and answer section at the end. I'll scroll back through and try and get all the ones you guys have asked, but just letting you know. And we're cruising up on an hour here, so I want to make sure we respect these 2 guys' time. Tolly's got to go play with his kitty. When to rotate? This could be a quick answer. You know, I think that's another mistake that solo laners make, right? Is they just squat their lane and they don't do anything, and then maybe late game, when everybody's fighting, they kind of gather up with the group and you know, fight. I think you see that a lot at lower levels of play, right? Where, you know, everybody squats lane until they're like 16, 17, and then, you know, as soon as you start taking Gold Fury or Pyro or things like that, you group up and then you just start taking objectives together. When the reality of it is you could start rotating at level 6, 7, 8, 9 through a proxy, or, you know, if you out clear really quickly, or if you poke the guy out and he's got it back, right? When do I make my presence known on the rest of the map throughout the game?
It also depends on the flow of the game. It's hard to see. You can't do the same thing every game, right? And that's the beauty of MOBAs in general, that not all games are going to be the same as the previous one. However, in the solo lane, it's ideal to rotate when you're expecting your team to make something really meaningful happen in like Gold Fury side, right? If your team can benefit from your presence more than they can from the enemy solo laners, then if you can make that 5-second window gap happen, do it every single time. getting that objective. It allows your team, to control the map a little bit more, and then more importantly, even getting tier 1 mid tower. If you lose your solo tower, it's not the end of the world. If you can trade out mid tower potentially for it, the positioning that gives you for retreating, being eliminated from the enemy team is a big deal.
Yeah, I think that's like a big thing that solo laners do, and talk about mistakes that new players make is like they feel like their tier 1 tower is like the be all and the end all of the world, right? I have lost the game. I have lost my solo lane if my T1 goes down before the other guys, right? Like that's like I see that all the time. Like people teleporting out to save a T1 that's got 200 health, right? Instead of like sticking with the team and doing an objective or things like that. And I think that's like I wish I brought it up like 5 minutes ago, but in my mind that's like a big faux pas when it comes to like playing in the solo lane is knowing that it's okay to give up your lane a little bit if you get something else that's more worthwhile elsewhere in the map, right? T1 mid tower, T2 mid tower, Pyromancer, Gold Fury, Fire Giant, right? You could give your stuff up if it means that you're getting one of those objectives.
Yeah, along that same line, I talked about it before, but just make sure you're always pushing your waves. If your waves are pushed, there's no way your tower is going to get really low, and it's not that big of a deal if your tower loses. If it dies, you're not losing the lane because of that. A lot of people think, like you said, once your tower's gone, bam, you lost that lane. You're a noob. Like, why did you play the matchup like that? It's not always the case, but if you're just making sure that you're keeping an eye on your waves being pushed, not rotating when your wave isn't pushed, because a common error and one of the mistakes I see a lot of people make is they'll rotate before their wave is pushed at all. So that means the solo can just tell his team to play back. He'll be like, hey, be careful, he's missing. I'm just going to push this wave under tower. He's going to lose the entire wave. I'm going to get damage on the tower, and now I have pressure for the next wave, right?
Right.
So just make sure if you're going to rotate, make sure your wave is pushed. And that's why proxying is just like, I know we keep bringing it up, and it's kind of more of an experience thing, but that's why proxying is just so important, because you're pushing the wave 15 seconds before he is pushing the wave if he's not proxying, and it just gives you this huge window to make plays on maybe on their buffs, maybe on Gold Fury side. You can walk over, and he's not able to, since his wave is dead, he's not able to push the wave under tower and get tower damage and stuff like that. So that's one way you can easily rotate. I'd say the three most important things that you're rotating to as a solo laner are three different points in the map. The most important and most obvious, I think, is Gold Fury. You can, come behind them when they're trying to pull Gold Fury, and you just get a huge power play there if their solo isn't there because you're behind them. There's no way for them to run away from you if you're playing most of these good warriors and guardians. So that's probably the most important thing and most obvious one.
Yep.
Another rotation that I think is really good, but you just have to be on the lookout for it, is a fight at mid camps that's close to the solo lane. Obviously, you're not going to go all the way through mid to the other mid camps to fight. But if you realize that, hey, they're trying to fight on those mid camps and there's about 2 or 3 people here and it's taking a while, I can come behind them and I can maybe get a cleanup kill. Maybe I can force some active, stuff like that. So that's another thing you can rotate to. And then the third, and I think this is probably the simplest one just because it's so close, is if they're deep in your jungle, say your speed is getting invaded,
Right.
especially on this new map, they have to go pretty far to do that. Or maybe just they're at back camps and they're grouped up a bit. You can easily walk towards that and come from behind them. So the common theme here is you're coming behind them, you're flanking them as a solo laner who is super tanky, cannot be punished. It's not like they can turn around and use all their abilities on you and instantly kill you because, again, you're supposed to be the one diving like their backline and stuff like that. So the common theme is just flanking them, and the rotation is basically just right after your wave is pushed and coming behind them when like an objective or a fight's about to happen.
So 2 things to get good at is identifying team fights where you can flank or come from behind. And 2 is get good at proxying now. It doesn't matter if you're a good player or a bad player. As you're learning your matchups and how to play your god, you should be learning how to proxy and how to safely proxy with whatever god you're playing. Just because of what it opens up. And that's great information. I got to be honest, I play in a lot of, I'll call them lower level games, and the amount of proxying I see out of the solo lane is almost non-existent, right? Everybody's a little bit too scared to die, right? Or too scared to make that play. So that's good information.
Yeah, and Totally talked about it before, but it'll get to a point in solo where maybe you both have 2 or 3 items online. They're both defense items. Maybe you have a Stone of Gaia. You're not going to be able to trade with, like, you're going to trade with each other, but you're doing no damage to each other.
Right.
You're not going to be able to kill each other, especially now with like Warrior's Blessing and stuff. There's a window where you can kill the enemy solo. If even if they're playing it pretty correctly. And then after that window, and I'd say it's about 2 or 3 items, you're just not going to be doing much. So what you should be doing is making sure that you're farming better than them, which is by like proxying and opening up opportunities and stuff like that.
Right.
So just make sure you realize when, hey, I just hit this guy for 50 damage with all of my abilities. What I probably shouldn't be sitting here doing nothing, something like that.
Awesome. Tolly, any other thoughts on rotating?
No, that's pretty much it. Also, something we didn't touch up on is like defending your jungler speed buff potentially, or maybe helping to invade the enemy speed buff, depending on just the flow of the game and how your jungler is doing, whether they're succeeding and wants to extend that lead, or whether they're struggling and might need your presence to defend their buff.
Sounds good. Cool. Awesome. On to the next one. We got like 2 more questions, then viewer Q&A, and then oh, when do I rotate? Already did that one. What do I build? What am I building in solo lane? And this is the last question, by the way, before we go to viewer Q&A. So if you have questions, type them up now, get them ready, and then we'll ask them for in a second here. But what am I building here? I think this is like a super nebulous answer, right? But like, what are some common counter builds, right? Like I've got a Guardian opposite me, and and keep in mind that in a lot of these games it's warrior on warrior. Occasionally you might get an RDO, right? Yeah, at the higher end you got Habwas and you got Chungas and you got crazy stuff that people pull out like pocket picks or things they like to play. 99% of the games that I play or that I play in viewer games every night is warrior on warrior, and that's it, right? So like with that in mind, obviously this changes as you get more experience in the game, and as you get more knowledge of the game you'll be able to figure it out for yourself. But for the new player specifically, like what am I going to try and build? What are the relics that I should get? When should I upgrade my teleport? Things like that, right? Like and you talk about cookie cutter builds for being like a big mistake, but having an idea of like the core items that should find their way into your build almost no matter what is helpful. Does that make sense? Like Gaia, for example. Gaia is really strong right now, right? You should almost always have Gaia, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere, second or third item. But, it's a really complicated question, but like what are your thoughts on the typical build pass? And I know this is going to change like next week, right?
Yeah, so what I would say is you're looking to make the bigger impact in team fights. After your first defensive item that's going to counter the enemy soul laner, like let's say against any guardian or mage, you want to get maybe Pestilence as that primary magical defense item after, let's say, your boots. The next thing is like, okay, what do I need to worry about from that enemy jungler, support, or mid? Do they have a lot of CCs? Am I going to be going Spirit's Robe here because they have a lot of CCs, or am I going to go Mad Guy's Busting because I have no CC immunity with the god that I chose in the soul lane? Those are the questions you have to be asking yourselves. Do I have to go Phantom because there's an Odin on the enemy team, Kabrakan, whatever the case is? Do they have a lot of healers? Do I need to go Cursed Ankh and on top of my Pestilence? Do I need a lot of regen with Stone of Gaia? More often than not, the answer is going to be yes for that one, because team fights last a decent amount of time, especially in the higher level play where people are really good about repositioning themselves and not just like all inning every single time. And the longer you persevere through the team fights as a soul laner is where you're going to see the most success.
Sure. So if we're talking about the 3 item, like let's use Wukong as an example, because we talked about him as a good beginning god, right? He's ability based, so I get my boots. I finished my breastplate because I went tier 1 breastplate because Fineokay told me to, right? I get a Gaia because I want the sustain in lane, and I get a Pestilence. And if you start there, you can pretty much finish your build with however, whatever defense you want. But those 3 items, would you call those core on ability-based gods right now?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. There's like some leeway, maybe your god makes good use of Glad Shield, which is kind of like a bridge between Stone of Gaia and Breastplate. You get CDR. You also get some sustain. But it's the same idea, right? You're going for CDR, you're going for physical defense. And
what gods would you suggest that on, right? I think because of the passive, it procs on ability damage, right? So it would have to be somebody that uses lots of abilities or does damage on all 4 of the abilities that they have, right?
Yeah. The most obvious ones are Kokolin, I think Osiris is good with it because his low cooldown on his one, it's what, 4 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. Wukong's a good example of that. Vamana, just
What
these
about
gods.
Bellona, right? She can do damage, and she's got 2 or 3 AoEs, right? I mean, or
Yeah,
she
all
can
4
hit
of her
multiple.
abilities do proc it. And her 2, in a team fight, you're going to be hitting a lot of people with it, so Glad Shield's good on her. It's just kind of what you want to do in lane. If you're trying to win lane super hard, I think Glad Shield with Stone of Gaia is really good because you just sustain so much, and it'll be before the enemy can, if you're Bellona, it's not like they can build Pestilence because you out-trade them because they don't have physical defense, right?
Right.
It's just about the counter building. So there's no real way they can get anti-heal that early, so Glad Shield Stone of Gaia is really good for winning lane. Because if they don't go that, you're just going to out-sustain them, and you're getting that physical defense. But in general, I think you should be looking at early on your core should be Breastplate, Pestilence, Stone of Gaia. Even I think after next patch, Stone of Gaia is getting nerfed, but I still think it's going to be not necessity, but it's something you should definitely look to be going in solo.
Sure.
And then kind of like for like counterbuilding item wise, as a solo laner, your job is to go on their backline, which is usually their ADC and their mage. So you're going to be looking to itemize against that, right? So say their ADC is Jingwei or Artemis, and you notice that they're building crit. Well, if they're building crit, you should be building Hide of the Nemean because it's a reflect damage, and the bigger numbers with crit, the bigger numbers are going to be reflected. So Nemean's really good against that. But if they're going like a pen build, which is something like they have lots of, maybe they have like Crusher, Titan's Bane, Kin Size, maybe you should look to go Mid Guardian because Kin Size damage is actually not reflected in Nemean because it's a yellow number. So it's just something that's in Smite. So because you can't reflect that kin size damage, which is the bulk of their damage, try and go a mid guardian. That way you can survive longer against them because it slows their attack speed
down. Like
Yeah,
so, like
exactly.
a mid guardian, and
Yeah.
was it
Witchblade even
Witchblade?
potentially. It's not very
Witchblade.
popular now, but it's definitely an option.
Yeah, Frostbound. Even like people haven't been going that much too much lately, just because people have been itemizing more for like straight protections and health.
Right.
But it's still an option. Like on Bellona, say you're just really far ahead, you notice that their ADC is kind of a problem. Well, maybe I'll just go on him with Frostbound and just make his life like really hard to deal with in team fights and stuff like that. And then for a mage, it's kind of the same thing. Mages, even though you're going on them, they're not. For an ADC, their main target is usually you as a solo laner because they can't really hit anybody besides you if you're in front of them, right?
Right.
Well, it's a little bit different for mages because they can obviously hit. They have a lot of AOE abilities, so they can hit you and other people. But usually they're going to be trying to ignore you and hit the carries or hit whoever's on the enemy team, right? So it's a little bit easier to itemize against them. Usually, you just need one magical defense item and a hybrid item. So an example of that is a pestilence and a mantle. That's usually all the magical defense you need because they aren't really hitting you too hard.
Right.
They're not trying to hit you. So counter building against them is much easier than it is for ADC. That's why I've kind of talked about ADC more.
Sure.
So yeah, that's basically how you.
And just to dovetail off of that, I had this as a question, but I didn't put it in the to go up on the screen. But team fight positioning, like, what's my job as a solo laner? Like, we're about to fight at Fire Giant. What is my job, right? And I think it at least the way I have it kind of really simply broken down in my head is whoever's bigger, if it's the ADC or the mid mage, I'm going to stick to them like glue and make their life a living hell, right? I'm going to itemize against that, whoever's, has the more damage potential, right? So if they're an early game hunter and it's early in the game, I'm going to go beat the hell out of them. If it's late in the game and they're a late game mage like a Scylla, I'm going to go beat the hell out of them, right? What's your opinion on, like, what is my job in the team fight? Who do I go after? What do I do? You're almost never peeling unless you're a guardian with a ton of abilities and your support's a heavy initiator like a Geb, right? What do I do, right? Who do I go after?
So you mentioned Geb being a heavy initiator. He's actually very flexible to do both.
Sure,
more often than not, in highest level competitive play, he'll always stay in the backline to peel for his backliners. But that's something that needs to be communicated with your support of, like, all right, who's engaging, who is going to be peeling? Because honestly, both can do, like, solo laners and guardians supports are the two frontliners that can do both, right? They're very flexible, which is why you'll see in SPL early guardian picks potentially because you can flex that in the solo lane, and guardians have a lot of safety in the solo lane, very difficult to really lock down, especially if they have sustain in their kit, like Sobek, Hades, specifically Artio has recently, come into Smite, and she's been really annoying for some people to deal with. And in terms of engaging, it's all about how your team is playing. If you're playing like a casual game, then sometimes you got to lead the charge as a solo laner and like force the issue on them and just go in, allow your team to kind of follow up. But you can't do it in such a manner where now you've baited them into a bad spot. You have to be calculating about when you do it, and you have to make sure that it's going to put your team with an objective, whether or not it's a tower or vice versa.
Right.
You almost have to play the general in a certain situation if you're like solo queuing, where you have to kind of evaluate, is it worth me going in here? Because you could easily bring out the ADC out of a team fight instantly as long as you're building correctly. But it's all about the rest of your team being able to follow up. And that's where I think teams can struggle on potentially, where there's that disconnect between your frontliners and your backliners. So once you find the way to bridge that gap, that's how teams can, find the wins.
Cool. Fino?
Yeah, I was gonna say, definitely, definitely have to play it game by game, right? It's
Sure.
not gonna always be the same thing. Like, sometimes you're gonna be needing to peel for your team. Maybe you're the initiator in this game, but you're the initiator, and immediately you pull back and you kind of like evaluate the team fight and stuff like that. So it's gonna be different each game, but in general, I think one of the most important things or most important jobs that a solo laner has is, I talk about it all the time, it's just diving the backline. Because one of the best ways to peel for your carries is to make sure their carries can't do anything, right?
Right.
If you think about a team fight and how it plays out, if I'm Osiris and I'm on their ADC and I'm making sure he can't hit any autos on anybody, he's having a rough time even surviving against me because I'm doing so much damage to him. There's no way he's going to hit my ADC. There's no way he's going to hit my mage. So in that way, I'm peeling for them, right?
Right.
And if their solo laner, and say their solo laner's a Bellona, and they're not doing that, I'm immediately winning that team fight.
Right.
Because their Bellona is trying to peel instead of making it impossible for their carries to do anything. So in general, I think diving the backline is probably the easiest job and the most important job solos have. But like Tolly said, it's definitely different each game. Sometimes that's not going to be your job. Sometimes you're going to be playing Sobek and you're going to be plucking their front line into your team so that you can get a free pick or just start the fight like that.
Right.
But even in that situation, like if I'm plucking their front line, I'm immediately going to ult and try and zone out their back line. So a lot of the time, you're inevitably going to be going on their back line.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's how you play the team fight for the most part.
How do you decide between whether or not you're going to blow up the mage or blow up the ADC? Like, what's your... Because you can't... Sometimes you can do both, right? If they're, like, standing directly on top of each other.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everybody kind of scatters, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times they are staying together because the only way they can deal with you is if they're 2v1.
Working together, yeah.
So sometimes you can just go on both of them, make sure that you don't die, and just keep them zoned out. A lot of times you're not getting the kills. You're just forcing their actives, making sure they're zoned out of the fight.
Right.
Not really hitting your carries and stuff, like I said. So if you can go on both of them, that's definitely good. It's not like you're always going to get the kill. But like you said before, talking about who's bigger, right? Maybe their mid has been getting punished all game. He's like 4 levels below me. He's not going to do much in this team fight anyway. But their ADC, however, has been free farming all game. He's got a couple kills. He's got some items online that are going to do a lot of damage in these team fights. I'm just going to go on him and make sure, like I said, the number one job is to make sure that they just don't have any impact.
Yeah, the only damage they
like,
can do is to you, right?
Exactly. And like you're building full tank, you're ahead on them, so they shouldn't be able to do much damage to you as long as you play it relatively correctly. And I talked about at the beginning of the stream, but I think solo lane has the most leeway and the most opportunity to make mistakes and it not matter. Just because you're building full tank, you're ahead of them. If you make a mistake and maybe he gets an extra couple autos on you, you ult out of that, and he was still zoned the entire fight. So
right.
Yeah,
makes
that's
sense.
basically how I decide.
All right, cool. So guys, we're gonna move on to viewer questions. So I'm not taking up these guys' entire nights. Both of them get really antsy and itchy if they're not able to play ranked every 45 minutes. So we want to make sure we
Withdrawals.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. So
It's really
guys,
bad.
if you guys have any specific questions, type them in chat. We'll start with the first one I saw earlier. Relic choices. Obviously, new player, right? I can think of there being like a handful of relics you want to buy, right? It's like teleport first for every new player in the solo lane. If you're new to the solo lane until you're extremely comfortable and and you feel like you got a good handle on your god, your matchup, proxying, all that stuff, get teleport. It saves you 9 out of 10 times when you make a mistake, right? It's a good way to get yourself back in a game where you made a mistake and you're getting, you're paying for it, right? But outside of that, I think like Heavenlies are good, Horrifics are good, Thorns are good, even a Meditation if they got some executes. What are your guys' opinion on what should I be building in that second relic slot?
Depends on the god.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah.
Blink, right? Like, is your team lacking engagement? Do I need to be going Blink here as a result? Tier, Hades, for example, are prime candidates at getting that relic. You're also thinking about, okay, Cursed Donk, do they have a lot of healers? Do I need a secondary shell with my Guardian to deal with the Odin pick, like I was talking about earlier? Those are factors. And it's all about just asking yourself questions over and over again. It's like just constantly reminding yourself the state of the game, refresh your memory about it, and making sure that your teammates are going to be doing a good job of what they need to do, right? Because everyone has their role. Your soul laner is there to also ensure that your team is not going to be losing these team fights because you're lacking the tankiness, you're lacking the utility even potentially, because there's no one way to build a soul laner, right? Like you could build utility, you could build carry style. It all just depends on the situation. If you're getting ganks from your jungler to help you snowball, you could build more carry status. If you're not, you go more utility with your guardian style and look to hard crowd control the opponents, throw some more Ymir walls at them, block some pathings, potentially catch people off guard, and make sure, have more cooldown reduction as a result if you're going to be that utility style.
I think for relics, it's definitely flexible. Relics are definitely something you have to look at the enemy team and your team and see what you need. Usually there's some items you can just build and it's going to be always good, like I said, like Fineokay and stuff like that. But for relics, it's definitely based on the team comps and how the game's going. So Blink, sometimes you need Blink to be an initiator, like Tolly said. Sometimes you're going to need Thorns because their ADC is ahead and maybe he's building crit. Just make sure that he never does anything to anyone. And then there's also the team fight options like Heavenly. Maybe they have double ADC. Horrific's good in that situation. Slows their attack speed, slows them down. And then sometimes like stuff like Shell could be good for the same reason, because if you upgrade it, you get the absorb stacks. So it's just definitely based on how the game's going. You just have to evaluate the comps and what the issue is in the game. If they have a lot of slows, then Heavenly's going to be much better, right? So
yeah. So just to break it down, right? Instead of asking the question is like, if you have good game knowledge, that's great, right? But if we're talking about like brand new players, just to break it down, just from what I heard, if your team doesn't have initiation, right, somebody who can jump in and do a bunch of damage or disrupt them, like a Bacchus, right? Bacchus is a great initiator, right? If you don't have somebody like that, get a Blink, right? Because you can surprise them, you can catch them off guard. When you say catch them off guard, it's like, you're instantly in the middle of their team, and you have like a shock, like a Blink shock ult is hilarious, right? Use that for initiation. If they have a lot of slows, use a Heavenly. If they have a lot of attack speed, or if they have a really immobile mage or ADC, get a Horrific. If they have an Odin, get a Phantom. And those are kind of like the criteria. The only caveat I'd say there is that if your team has a lot of leaps, like if you got like a Fafnir, Anhur, Scylla, Hunbats, Kukulkan, you don't need the Phantom against an Odin, right? Because everybody can get out of the cage. So pay attention to who can jump on your team as far as it goes up against an Odin. There was an earlier question. Is Odin garbage these days, or is he stronger in the jungle? How's his solo lane presence?
In the highest competitive play, I dislike Odin because against players, they know how to time their CCs upon landing in the jump and take advantage of it. There's a slight immunity frames, or not slight immunity frames, but there's a small frame window where you can abuse that and disrupt the bird bomb combination.
Cool. Yeah, and by the way, these viewer questions could be like short answers. We don't have to launch into
like
a 20
lightning round.
Yeah, just lightning round stuff, because I want to make sure we.
All right, then we'll just Tolly will answer first, then I'll go after him. So for the Odin thing, like Tolly said, it's just you can interrupt his jump, so he doesn't do a lot of damage. His clear is good. but he's kind of just an ult bot late game, doesn't really do much. So that's kind of why his laning phase isn't good, like Tolly said, because you interrupt his jump, and his late game isn't that great just because he's an ult bot.
Next question, Erlang Shen, is it ever okay to go a damagey build? If so, what items should I seek? You know, when I think of that, I think of throw a Frostbound into your build. Maybe, I don't know, if you're really far ahead, build a Kins or something like that. But what, you know, is it okay to do it? And if so, you know, what 1 or 2 items should you try and fit into your build?
I would say it's okay to do it every now and then. I wouldn't do it in, like, let's say SPL games or anything like that. But I think if you're looking to have fun, Erlang Shen is definitely a lot of fun. When ahead, you can build those damaging items. You can, because you get like the health right from your turtle. You also get the sustain. If you're not dealing with anti-healers, you're going to get away with a lot of aggression in that solo lane. So it's not a bad idea to look for those windows, evaluate it based on circumstances if you can get away with it. I wouldn't just do it recklessly. Unless you're like a jungler along Shen, that you might be able to get away with going full damage. And his burst is actually unreal. You know, he has the Fatalis effect once you use that Mink form. Very difficult to get away from if you don't have like a jump over a wall, for example.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're playing in solo, usually you just want to be building full tank because the way you do damage is being tanky, being unkillable. So in soloing, I probably wouldn't build any damage items on him except maybe Frostbound in some situations, especially because it's just fun on him because it procs twice. It hits on his main hit and also his dog's hit.
Right.
And to go along with that, everything, all on hit effects, work on his dog as well. So like Oboe, all you have to do is auto twice and it'll proc it. So if you want to mess around, you can maybe go Oboe on him, or like his dog even crits, so you maybe go crit if you want to go damage items. But like I said, for me personally, and I think most solos, they're gonna be building full tank so they can do damage.
All right, quick yes or no. Is Shock Baby's first solo laner?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Can Artio go solo in any matchup? Is there any losing matchup where Artio is not strong?
Let me think.
I would say probably not. Only matchup I would be afraid of is maybe a little bit is Osiris.
Yeah, I was
He
going
has
to say
the anti-heal.
Osiris for the anti-heal.
Spam his abilities, you know, kind of just auto her down. And if you're against a really good player who knows what they're doing, I would say probably Jing 10, because you have no CC immune in your kit, and you're playing a pressure god like Artio. You want to push up a lot. Well, you have no CC immunity. What if he ults you in a tower and knocks you up? He'll knock up your dash. Like, there's just a lot of outplay potential there, so that's the only matchup I would be worried about.
I think that, yeah, Artio can be played against almost any matchup, as long as you understand that you will lose levels 1 through 4 against some matchups. But once you get Breastplate of Valor, Shoes of Focus, potentially, your sustain is good enough to the point where it doesn't matter the matchup.
All right. Is Serb solo underrated?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think it's more rated now that they buffed him in the recent patch, because people are starting to play him. But yeah, he's definitely, I think, a decent solo pick, especially in ranked.
His burst damage is very misleading. Like, if you're very accurate with that spit, it's just gonna surprise people. The scaling percentage on that, you get like, you know, a hybrid magical defense item like Void Stone. You get, let's say, just one damaging item like, let's say, Spirit Magus for funsies, and you're melting anybody you touch.
Right. Thoughts on assassins in the solo lane?
I wouldn't do it personally unless your name is Cyclone Spin back in Season 2, getting assistance from Weaken. That's the only time. Realistically, you can't get away with the assassins in the solo lane in the highest level of competitive play. You're going to get camped. You're not going to be able to out-sustain the opposition. And if you're forcing that kind of a pick because you have a strategy of a jungler helping you gank the lane just to snowball you, well, now you're putting your other team in a very awkward position of them getting ganked.
Awesome.
Yeah, most of them just have too bad of matchups. Pretty much all of them have too bad of matchups. The only 3 that I would say you could play if it fits your playstyle and you just really like these gods are Camazotz, Fenrir, and Ratatasker. Notice that they all have good sustain.
Yep.
Rat with his Acorn, Camazotz with all of his heals. He has so many. And then Fenrir with his life steal.
Too,
so,
yeah.
that kind of helps with their bad matchups. So.
All right. let's see. How do you deal with a jungler that's camping your lane? This is going to be a quick answer because I know we got to wrap up here.
Early Chalice of Oracles, making sure you communicate with your teammates if you're on voice comms with, asking every now and then where the enemy is. Understanding buff timers as well. Like if your speed buff is coming up on your side, then be prepared that the enemy's speed buff is coming up as well. They could potentially look to rotate on you after the fact.
Sure.
Yeah, being wary of timers. If you know that the jungler is going to be helping with their blue, he may look for a gank immediately after, so just play back. One important thing that I guess could be in even the mistake section is soul laners. A lot of beginner soul laners won't play towards the wall of the soul lane. They'll play towards the jungle side, which means they can't look into the jungle while they're clearing the wave, which is important. And also, you're further away from the jungle. That means you have more time to react to a gank. So making sure that I can't really explain it just over voice comms, but you're making sure your head's looking towards the jungle, and you're making sure you're standing near the edge of the map.
Okay, so as far from the jungle as you possibly can while still clearing.
Exactly.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
that's
a good point to mention also for dual lane.
Yeah.
All right, last question. This one's for Fineokay. Who are your scrim partners and people you're playing with lately?
Ooh.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. That was from Mark.
Okay.
No, I know you can't talk about it.
I wish I could.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, we got some troll questions here about whether or not Loki's the best solo laner in the game. The answer is no. Don't play him ever.
Yeah. Just look at my picture that we have up here. I read him like a book.
But no, seriously, guys. I think we'll probably wrap up there. We're a little bit over time. We've been an hour and 25 minutes. It's definitely the longest session we've had so far. I think the other roles are pretty straightforward, and solo there's just so much in matchup and counter matchup, and there's lots and lots and lots of information. So I appreciate you guys sticking out, answering the questions, going into the level of detail that you have. Obviously, this is meant for new players, but I think there's a if you guys watch this through once, there's a good kind of treasure trove of basic things that you guys will get out of this to make yourselves a little bit better in the soul lane. And then go back through and watch it again, after you played for a week or two and see if there's anything you can pick up from what these guys are saying. Because we did dive a little bit deeper than we have on some of the other roles. But other than that, the next episode is going to be, at least in a week or two, I think we're going to have Barra and Taco on to talk about the ADC role. So yeah, guys, keep an eye out on Twitter, on Twitch, and on Reddit for when we're going to do another one of these again. Thanks again to Tolly and Fineokay. Make sure you guys are following them on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. They're a great resource outside of this VOD, and their links will be down inside of the description of the YouTube video as well. So if you're catching this on YouTube, make sure you give these guys a follow. And yeah, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for the next episode.